Welcome to State of Wellbeing, a podcast from South Dakota State University. The State of Wellbeing is a holistic well-being podcast with the goal of supporting the campus community as we strive to be a growing, high-performing, and healthy university. Welcome to State of Wellbeing podcast. This episode, we're going to be talking about career transitions and just transitions in general that we go through in life. I'm Caitlin Walters. I'm the Wellbeing Specialist, and I'm here with Stephen Miedema, the Assistant Director for Career Education in the Office of Career Development. Hi, Stephen.
Hi, Caitlin. How are you doing today?
Doing well. Thank you so much for joining us.
Absolutely. Pleasure to be on here.
Yeah. So we're really excited to talk about career transitions, and who better than to come in and talk about it than the Office of Career Development. Stephen, can you tell me about your career path and what's brought you to where you are today?
Yeah, so my career path started here at SDSU. So I came here way back once upon a time as a biology student. I initially came to SDSU thinking I wanted to be a doctor. Really, I had no idea what I wanted to do. And I knew that doctors use science and they made a lot of money. And I thought that would be a cool gig. So I got here and then I started working in healthcare as a CNA, a part-time job for me while I was in school. And I realized healthcare wasn't for me. And so going into my senior year, I had a backup plan of doing research in a research lab. I started doing research, working on genetics, and realized that I didn't get to talk to people. And that made it for a really long shift for me when I was doing that work. So I ended up kind of panicking and going to grad school. Ended up going to the Counseling and Human Resource Department where I graduated with my Master's of Education. While I was doing my master's degree, I really didn't know what was going on either. And so I ended up getting an internship in my final semester because I heard the Career Development Office was short-staffed. So I said, hey, I need one more internship to be able to graduate. And you guys are short-staffed. Would you like an unpaid intern? Of course they said yes, right? So then I graduated from there, and as I was finishing, really with like 3 weeks left of that semester, my supervisor left. And so her job just fell into my lap. And so I ended up staying here at SDSU since then. I worked as a career coach full-time for about 3.5 years before transitioning into the assistant director role.
Wow, that fits really well into what we are going to talk about today. It sounds like you went through quite a few different transitions. Some of those may have been intentional and some of them were maybe not so intentional. And I think that's really important is a lot of times people think like, I have to have this career plan laid out and I'm going to stick to it and I'm going to commit to this, but things come up, right? And like you might change your mind after experiencing that career. Can you tell us a little bit about like any of those notable big transitions you went through, like anything you learned or observed when you were going through those?
Yeah, so that's one of the things that's been interesting is a lot of my transitions have been really subtle almost. It's just been like almost a role change, but still in the same location. And so I had to navigate that transition of going from, when I went for an undergrad, I was, going to classes with peers. Some of those peers didn't graduate with me. Well, I got to my grad program and I ended up being a teaching assistant within the biology department. Well, all of a sudden I had TAs who were my friends. And so I had to figure out how to transition through that. So that was awkward. I go through grad school, I finish grad school, and all of a sudden I'm still here on campus. And all of a sudden I'm navigating, well, how am I going to be a professional when all these people on campus know me as a student still? And how do I establish that? So most of my transitions have been, pretty stable, just here at SDSU, not really moving or having a big break or anything. One notable transition though that I am really thankful for it now is when I graduated high school, I moved out. My sister had just bought a farm up in northern Minnesota. I'm originally from western South Dakota, and so it was a big transition for me to move up there. But she lived in an area where there were a lot of part-time jobs that paid pretty well. And so I could go up there, work on the farm, and make some money to pay for school. Well, all of a sudden I moved 7 hours away where I didn't know anybody. And so I had to learn how to all of a sudden meet people for the first time in my life. Whereas growing up in a small town, never had to accomplish that. So that was the one big transition. In some ways, it was a lot more intimidating, moving someplace where you don't really know anyone. But in other ways, I thought it was easier because I had that break. It was a physical transition. And when you go through those bigger transitions like that, I feel like you can almost sometimes have more opportunity for growth.
Yeah, I love the idea too of moving somewhere where nobody knows who you were. I think I moved somewhere that nobody knew who I was in high school. Nobody knew my background. And so you not necessarily reinvent yourself, but I think you get to put yourself out there in ways that maybe you wouldn't have if you knew everybody and they knew who you were. So I love that idea of being able to try something new. And, I think transitions can be a time of a lot of stress and a time of just, I mean, it's a big change and it's hard and it can be really scary, but I think it's also just that like beautiful opportunity to test out some other like facets of your personality and try out some different interests or hobbies that you might have that you might not have before because you felt so comfortable in like where you were, whether that was career-wise or, location-wise. I think the transition can be a really awesome time as well. So we're, talking during this time where a lot of students are getting ready to graduate and getting ready to move on to maybe their first full-time job. Can you tell me what should college students expect moving into their first full-time job? Was there anything that surprised you when you started your first full-time job that you weren't expecting?
The number one thing was lack of expectations. You go through school, right? We're following the syllabus. We've been doing that since we're in kindergarten. You're trying to get A's. You're trying to get 100% on it. Clear exactly what you need to accomplish to be successful. And then you graduate. You get this job. You walk in day one. You say, what's the syllabus? What do I need to do? And your boss is going to say something along the lines of, okay, get comfortable, get settled in, and then we'll talk about it here later. And then you'll talk a little bit, and they'll give you one assignment or one project. Okay, cool, we get that. And then you say, well, did I do a good job on that? Well, you don't know because they're probably not going to give you much feedback unless you ask. And so all of a sudden the transition goes from having very clear structure all the time to all of a sudden it's a little bit more vague. All of a sudden you have to ask a lot more questions. You have to get to know what your boss expects, and they might not be the best at articulating that. And so I think the number one thing that students need to be prepared for is really being able to just ask questions and be ready to kind of go with what their supervisor is thinking at the time and try to just do their best. At the end of the day, that's really all we can do is do our best. And as long as we are communicating what we think is happening, the supervisor is going to appreciate that and they'll be able to give you some feedback.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. You're not going to get like an A plus some feedback on every project you do in your career. I also think that asking questions, it can start as early as the interview process, right? Like you don't have to wait until your first day to say like, what am I supposed to wear to work today? I think finding out what the dress code is during the interview process is so valuable because then you know like what to expect, and if that's not going to fit your personality or your lifestyle, like you can make some decisions on that. I think being able to ask expectations and even laying out your own expectations, right? I'm someone who I really thrive off of feedback, and whether that, I want to know like what can I do to improve myself. I don't just want to hear like good job. I want to hear like, oh, I think you could do this better next time. And so setting those expectations in the interview process, and even once you get the job of like, hey, this is what I'd love to see from my supervisor. This is what I need to succeed. And that might be feedback. It might be having clear expectations on policies in the workplace. I even think of like understanding your work hours. So I used to oversee student employees, and I would always try to not warn them, but give them a heads up that when you leave here, you're not just working 3-hour shifts, you're working 9-hour shifts, not 9 hours, but you're working, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. with an hour-long lunch break maybe, depending on what the, settings are. But the number of messages I received, a couple months after my students had graduated, reaching back out to me to say like, thank you so much for warning me. I didn't take you seriously, but you were right. Like the hours are very different from what I'd been working as a student employee. I think just like trying to set those expectations up ahead of time, super important.
Yeah, that was a really interesting transition there coming from undergrad because you're all working all over the time. I remember my senior year, I woke up at 11 a.m. every day because that's when I had class. Well, I also worked evenings as a server. And then once I got done as a server, I was going to the gym until midnight, and then I would study until 3 a.m. And so it wasn't that I was just sleeping all the time. It was just that was my schedule. And you're always bouncing around. You're going to one class, you're taking a break, going to another class, and then you get to work, and all of a sudden there's not that built-in break. That was one of the things I had to learn for myself when I started was, I need to take breaks. I need to be intentional about this to just give myself that time to kind of like collaborate and go forward. So that's a really interesting thing for students to be aware of, like going forward, is sometimes you can also build your own schedule. It really does depend on jobs. Yeah, some jobs, absolutely, you have to be there from set hours to set times. I remember when I started at SDSU full-time, though, I was talking to my supervisor, and I noticed that she would come in most days at 10 o'clock, and she would work until 8 o'clock in the evening. She didn't have kids at home anymore, didn't really have anything to go back to, and so she knew she was more productive at that time. I also recognize that I'm not a morning person and that students often aren't either. And so when I started, I said, well, what if I came in at 10 too? And that worked out better for me because then I would stay until 6 o'clock or so. And then when I would get off work, well, hey, the gym was quiet because you didn't have that after work rush at the gym. And so I could go and have a routine that worked for me better. And so that's one thing where just having that conversation really did allow me to have those opportunities there.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think something else that students often find to be maybe a big surprise moving into that full-time position is when you're a student, you are looking forward to maybe winter break, you're looking forward to those beautiful summer breaks that we're about to head into. And depending on the job, I mean, unless you're maybe in education or something that's a little bit more seasonal, you really don't have that really nice long winter break. You don't have a nice long summer break. There's not necessarily a spring break. You'll get holidays here and there, but I think that can be a big surprise too. And just trying to navigate like that feeling of like, oh, okay, like I don't have a big break to look forward to. I think that could be a big tricky one for people too.
It is tricky. You have to find times to give yourself a break. Sometimes that makes sense, right? So sometimes you do have a job that's very seasonal. You know, you go through those busy periods, you have that done, and then it's a great time for a break. Or maybe you get done, you reflect on your end of the year review, and then you have that time for a break. Sometimes you don't, though. And so you have to kind of build that in for your own life because I think we have to continuously, you know, we're talking about transition. Well, we have to continuously transition throughout our career. If you don't build in a time to be intentional about growth and that transition into growth, aka a vacation, how are you supposed to have those moments to kind of like reflect and then come back to it rejuvenated to be able to embrace who you want to continue to grow into?
I think that's a great point. I think it's like setting good boundaries too, that like finding that work balance as soon as you start and trying to set those boundaries as best you can. I know sometimes when you're starting in a position, you really have to take a lot of opportunities and you might be working hard for your first year or two, but also trying to set those healthy boundaries of, you know, I'm going to not have my emails on my phone from work. I'm going to turn my brain back to personal life when I leave work. I'm not taking work home with me as much as I can. I'm going to use my vacation time, as you said. Like, I'm going to use that. I'm going to intentionally use it. I think it's much easier to set those boundaries up front when you start than, like, go backwards from there when they start to understand how you work. And so being able to, like, really set yourself up well when you start of, like, this is what I'd like to get out of this job. This is what I'd like to set for my boundaries, for my work-life balance. I think that that's a really valuable point.
You know, and that's something you talked earlier about asking questions, how it starts in the interview. But that's also something that starts in the interview is you have to be honest with who you are. You know, students always come into my office and they want to ask, well, what's the best answer to give during an interview? You know, they think there's some magic, perfect thing out there, and there isn't. I always tell students, well, you have to be authentic because it's not about being the absolute best well-being specialist. It's about being the best Caitlin as a well-being specialist. And so that's what we really like to push is if you're not authentic, then all of a sudden that's where we can start to see some imposter syndrome coming in. We can start to feel like those feelings of isolation and just like your job isn't going to work for you. And that's the end of the day. I want people to understand they're not working for their job. Their job's working for them because there's so much more than life. I mean, it's probably a little counterintuitive hearing that from a career coach, but your life is the important part. Your job's just the thing that helps you get that.
I think that's really great. I love that. I think one thing to help with reducing that stress during transitions too is when you do start, do you have any, I guess, advice on finding a mentor? Have you ever like actually asked for someone to be your mentor? Have you just kind of like fallen into it? I'm curious what your thoughts are on mentorship.
So mentorship is always one of those interesting things to me. I was raised in rural South Dakota as a guy. We're not allowed to ask for help. We're not allowed to show weakness. That's just not us. Now, whether that's right or wrong, right? Very different story. But I remember that was one thing. I came to college, and I would hear people talk about mentors. Oh, you got to find a mentor. You got to find a mentor. And I always just thought, oh, that's something that just kind of happens. But turns out finding a mentor really comes from asking questions and asking for help. And so it's awkward to put yourself out there, you know, because you think, oh, why would this person want to go out of their way to help me with other things? But at the end of the day, that's what it comes down to is you need to find somebody. We have never made it this far in life before, right? Every single day is a new day for us. So finding a mentor that has maybe just a few more years of experience on us than what we currently have is so valuable, if nothing else, just to, pitch ideas to and just have a third party to maybe just talk through ideas with. And so it's awkward. It really is awkward, and it takes some vulnerability. By going out there and finding someone who is doing the work you want to be doing or doing the things you want to be doing and just talking to them about their story, I can tell you, we all like to talk about ourselves. That's a thing at the end of the day. I tell students all the time, hey, ask questions to any employer that comes to campus. They're going to tell you stories. That's what old people do, right? I'm starting to get to that point that I'm an old guy and I'm telling stories too. But at the end of the day, if you ask questions, people are excited to tell you and to share their wisdom because, we're all proud of how far we've made it in life. And we all want to give back and help somebody get through it a little bit easier than we did. And so while it's intimidating to ask for somebody to be a mentor, even just starting off with saying, hey, would you mind just sitting down with a cup of coffee with me? I have a few questions and you seem like you have it all together. Could we talk about that?
Absolutely. I think a lot of what we've been talking about goes back to just being willing to be a little bit vulnerable, to ask questions, to seek information from people that you want to learn from. I also think on the flip side of that, as people who have been in positions for a longer period of time, faculty, staff on campus, we should be thinking about being a mentor to those that we're coming across, right? To that new hire that has just started and reaching out and taking them out to coffee or just sitting down and saying hey, let's eat our lunch together today. And I think just being willing to maybe offer up some mentorship because not everybody's going to be comfortable asking, but I think everybody can benefit from it, right? And I think it's one of those things that it takes a little bit of vulnerability on both sides, but I think it's so valuable when we can connect with people who have a broad range of experience and different perspectives and maybe who have been here longer than we have, obviously.
One of the things you're talking about there with mentoring, I've spoken with Travis Jensen about this from the Alumni Mentoring Program, that the mentee, the one who's being mentored, isn't the only one who gets something out of it. Mentors, it's valuable to do that too because it rejuvenates you because you get excited again. You remember what it was that drew you to that career and you remember that passion because it's tough not to see that passion when you're working with somebody who is in a situation that you used to be in. We all know that working with college students is extremely rewarding. Well, there's ways to do it outside of what our daily job is too.
Yeah, I think that's such a great shout out for that program. Do you mind, again, saying, where can we find that program? How do people get in contact with that one?
Yeah, so Travis Jensen, he's with the Alumni Mentoring Program with the Alumni Center. So getting in contact with him, easy enough. Find him on the website or just stop over there and say hi at the Foundation building, and they'd be happy to connect you with him. For students, there is an application that they send out once a year. I'm not sure when that due date is, but they then get matched with mentors who are happy to work with those students. And we see that right now we have lots of students who are interested in that. And so if anybody is interested in being an alumni mentor, they can reach out to Travis and I'm sure he can connect them with somebody.
That's great. I think we talked a little bit about faculty and staff being willing to be mentors, but could you maybe talk a little bit about what you think faculty and staff could do to help support students as they prepare to leave college, whether that's going to grad school or going on to their first career? Any advice for faculty and staff out there listening on how they can support that?
It's exactly that. It's listening. Being there and being supportive. We all go through different transitions in life. I talked about how I had moved out, right away when I turned essentially 18. It was a month later I moved out. Well, some students, they don't do that. Some students, they, are from here in Brookings and they haven't experienced going to someplace completely new. And we have some students who come from other countries here. And so we all are at different places. We've all had different terrifying moments or those scary big what ifs. And so just being there and remember that, even if it seems like some kind of trivial, grad school, why would you be worried about that? You start off grad school and it's great. There's a lot of structure. They're there to help you. We were in those shoes too at one point. And so just remembering that we can be there to listen, to give a friendly face, to smile, and to encourage them. Because at the end of the day, having somebody in your corner really does make the world of a difference when it comes to taking risks like trying something new or going through a transition.
Yeah, absolutely. I think even just like having these conversations in your classroom or in your staff meetings, if you oversee student employees, I think just like having conversations with them as much as you can to like just like talk about changes and talk about like what it's going to be like when they leave or ask if they have any questions. I found like when I've been really honest and, I've been through a couple of career transitions at this point, and I've told them like, I was really scared to make these changes. And then a friend of mine said, you're always like, you can always change your mind, right? Like it is never like too late to change your career. You can always find something new, try something new. And I would say that to my students as much as I possibly could, just hold those like open and honest conversations and just say like, try it all, like try whatever you can and be willing to be flexible and open to changes, because I think it can be really valuable if you just encourage that in your classroom. I think also, obviously, plugging the Office of Career Development. So I'd love to hear a little bit about what do you all do over there, because you do so much, and I just want to make sure we really take the time to talk about what you do.
Yeah, so really, to summarize it, we're here for students when it comes to their careers. Now, careers is a big concept, right? It's everything from that part-time job. When a student comes in, maybe they need a few extra bucks. I know I worked a work-study job. I needed to pay for school somehow, and so that was a big deal, right? So we can help students find those jobs on campus. We also can just talk about some of those conversations about, well, is your major the right fit? We have tons of really great academic advisors on campus, tons of great professors. We also have, a really, really good exploratory studies program, but they don't always necessarily have the time to sit down and have those dedicated conversations about just what options are out there. And so we can fill out at that point too. Now, we think later on, we work with students on things like how do you write a resume? How do you apply for internships? We'll also talk with students about things like, well, what about applying to grad school? Is that the right fit for you? We go through all that work, we complete all of our education, and we can work with students on things like how do you prepare for an interview? That's what I just walked from before I came over here, was working with a student preparing for an interview to go and work in a career field for the first time this summer. Well, really cool to be able to be there and just help support them in those moments. So those are those basic things. Then we think of the stuff for alumni, right? Or for, recent graduates, things like how to talk about salary. We can talk about benefits. Remember, that's something that's confusing. I think everybody would agree that benefits are confusing. And so sometimes students will come in just to talk through that with us because they don't understand what's going on. And even though I'm not a benefits expert by any means, just having some of that experience can still be beneficial to work with those students. And we don't just work with students either. We do work with all alumni as well. And so we do end up having some of these more conversations about like career transitions, about things like how to start strong in a new job. How do you get yourself established in a new place? And just kind of some more of that, listening and being there for people, because it is scary whenever you go through those transitions. So
yeah, there's so much that y'all do, and I think it's just really wonderful resource here on campus that we really want all students to get out there and utilize it, and alumni as well. And I think going back to like how can faculty help support students in that transition is just encouraging them to reach out to the office, get in there, speak to you all, make sure to have them like help them make that connection with you.
Yeah, we're not scary, right? Let students know that we're here, we're human too, and we want to make a difference.
Absolutely. I think the last little bit that we wanted to talk about was just how to take care of yourself during times of transition, how to kind of manage your overall well-being. I think one big thing that I like to think about, I just recently moved here, and so that was a huge transition for me. And I tried really hard to stick to good habits that I already had. And so that was maybe like trying to walk my dogs every day, even though I was in a new place. And it was that sticking to things that I was doing before the transition started helped me kind of move through that, because it was like, this is familiar. I know I'm going to put my dogs on a leash. I'm going to take them for a walk around the block. I know what to expect, right? And just like really maintaining those habits that you already have. I think making sure you value your taking care of yourself. So getting good sleep, again, like nutrition, what are you eating? Are you drinking enough water? Like make sure you're taking good care of yourself physically, and that physical activity too, whether it's walking, whether it's your favorite type of recreation, just trying to stay active during those times. I think that can definitely help with that stress and help maintain that well-being. Anything you would add to that as far as like maintaining your well-being?
I think you touched on a really great point there, is when we move, to maintain those things that you're doing well, but it's also a great opportunity to add in stuff for yourself. Mm-hmm. when we move and we like, especially a physical move into like a new, apartment, new house, whatever that is, a new town, it's going to completely change your thought patterns. And so why not try to just establish those new healthy routines in your life at that? Now, at the same point, don't stress yourself out trying to do that when you are going to be going through a lot of stress anyway. You mentioned water. I can tell you every single time I've started a new job in a new place, I forget to drink water. Absolutely. Remember that little stuff, right? Have a water bottle. There's a lot of things. I always say is find something like routine, like what you touched on. I'm going to go a little bit further, and I want you to find a place in the community that you feel involved and that you feel like you're a local, if that makes sense. Whether that's a coffee shop that you regularly go to and you just spend some time talking to that barista. Maybe that's going to be a new routine where you can feel like you get to know someone. That makes, the new place that you move to seem so much smaller and less intimidating and less daunting. The other part of it, too, is embrace that you're new. Embrace that and ask those questions and get to know what's out there. If you find, a community group doing something really cool and exciting, well, there's some people that you can meet. There's some friends you could meet. And so maybe it's going to be like volunteering in town. Maybe it's going to be a professional group. In Brookings, we have Leadership Brookings, right? That might be something that you find. And so you can really find those opportunities. You just have to sometimes be intentional. It's really easy to sit at home and, turn on Netflix because, that's safe, right? But at the end of the day, you're in a new community. Make it your community.
Yeah. Well, I think that's such a good point, too. I think of when a student graduates and they go on to working full time, maybe their days are a little bit longer at work. They feel like they have less time to themselves. I think it's really important to put value into the time that you're away from work. And so, yes, Netflix is great. I love to turn on Netflix every now and then, but having some value in that too. So, if you just come home and you turn on Netflix and then you go to bed, that time away from work is going to feel just so short. Versus if you dedicate a day each week to going and seeing a friend or, going to that coffee shop like you mentioned, or maybe picking up a new hobby. And so it's like Wednesday's my hobby day and I'm going to do my new hobby on Wednesdays. Trying to make sure there's value in that time that you have away from work, I think can really help with that, again, establishing that balance that we talked about.
One thing, when we talk about our work day, right? Everybody always thinks you get up, you go to work, you come home, you do this stuff after work. I kind of had this epiphany a couple of years ago. I came home from work one day and I was just mentally exhausted. I do a lot of people work in my job and that can sometimes drain on me. The next morning I woke up and I noticed, I'm mentally fresh. I'm ready to go again for the day. And I said, wait a minute. I have this time before work too. We always think of, you got to wake up just in time to go to work. But you can also wake up and read a book in the morning. You can wake up and go to the gym. You can wake up and go grocery shopping. You can use that time before work too. I also find that if I do that, I'm not as cranky when I get to work because I'm already up and awake, right? It seems pretty obvious, but at the end of the day, you can make time in the mornings too.
That's such a good point. I've always thought of myself as I can't get up early. I don't really like exercising early morning, but moving here, I started running in the mornings before work, and I feel so much more energized and just I feel like my day has started a little bit earlier, so I'm a little bit more bright-eyed by the time I get to my desk. Maybe running's not for you, but even just a walk, or like you said, maybe it's even just getting up early enough to enjoy an extra cup of coffee at home, right? Instead of just taking it with you to work.
The simple things in life.
Exactly. Well, great. I wanted to maybe one last recommendation is just as you go through these transitions, connecting with the resources that are available to you. And so if you're still here on campus, if you're a student and you're preparing to leave, connecting to the counseling services if you feel like you want to talk to someone. Obviously, we've already said it, but connecting to the Office of Career Development. And again, that service is continued for you afterwards as you're an alumni. And so making sure you stay connected. And then just making sure that when you enter into that new career or that new position that you're starting, identifying your resources that you have there too. And so that might be your employee assistance program, making sure kind of like you said, understanding your benefits, but generally there are services available to new employees too. So just making sure you're reaching out and connecting to the resources that you have available. Anything else you'd like to plug or any last things for our talk today?
Transitions are intimidating, but they're also an opportunity. Embrace that opportunity. You can really make something out of it.
Thank you so much, Stephen. I really appreciate you being here, and thanks for listening. Thank you for listening to this episode of State of Wellbeing, a podcast from South Dakota State University. This podcast is brought to you by the Mental Wellbeing Team and SD State Health.